I'm Don Pease, and I'm speaking in the Theodore Geisel room of the Dartmouth Bakerberry Library, a room that's described as an imaginative resource for Dartmouth students. And I'm here to talk about the remake of one of Dr. Seuss's most significant children's books, the Lorax. In order to give you some sense of the connection between the significance of that book and the room in which I'm talking about it, let me just gesture to give you a sense of the place this site occupies. It's about 33 degrees across from the Rollins Chapel, where Theodore Geisel matriculated in a convocation in September of 1921. It's about 40 degrees from the Wilson Hall, which was the library at Dartmouth at the time that Ted Geisel read books and wrote and created cartoons when he wasn't reading the books he should have been reading, in spaces not unlike this space, and imaginative resources that would be preserved for posterity in the images that line these walls and that hold special places in the imaginations of every one of you who had Dr. Seuss read to you as children, and who in turn, as that heritage, it's a deep, deep human heritage, read those stories to your children as well. We're also across the way from Topliff Hall, where Ted Geisel was a resident, 416, and over another few blocks is Sigma Ep Fraternity, where Ted Geisel was a brother. I want to give you some sense of the significance of those locations by also giving you the time in which this video is getting recorded. We're the day after Winter Carnival, and we're the day before Valentine's Day. And in a sense, the Lorax is a book about the borderline separating what happens when human beings begin to impersonate Old Man Winter and turn the springtime environment into something that looks like the surface of the moon, and what happens when an imagination that is as vital and as childlike as Ted Geisel's turns the desire to recover the spring that's been appropriated by winter back into the pure Edenic imagination of the green world he called Dartmouth, by constructing a carnival, a winter carnival of the imagination called the Lorax. The Lorax has characters, the Onceler and the Lorax himself, who could have been subjects of winter carnival sculpture. If you think about the character of the Lorax, he looks like a miniaturized version of Paul Bunyan, who got his reputation for cutting down forests. But the Lorax is about the size of a munchkin, who appears in the moment of that text in which the dreary, almost gray, black and white captions prior to the discovery of the truffula trees give way to the pure living color of the redeemed Eden that the Onceler and we together encounter when the Lorax needs to speak for the trees. Now, in suggesting that the Lorax is about the transition from winter to spring and about the ways in which the human imagination has a responsibility to sustain what could be called the permanent springtime of human existence by recovering the childlike imagination of the boy who must plant the last of the truffula seeds in order to bring the Lorax back. You have to understand the significance of that event, the lived biography of Ted Geisel. When Ted Geisel wrote the Lorax, he was going through a profound, depressing moment in his life. His wife of more than 35 years, Helen, died 3 years earlier, and he felt blocked by a winter of the imagination. And so Audrey, who recovered his spirits and redeemed his imagination, suggested they travel to Africa in order to get away from what he felt was the false need constructed by his publishers in order to exploit the imaginative resources of Dr. Seuss's treasure house of figures. When he traveled to Kenya and saw a herd of elephants cross a mountain, he turned to Audrey and said, "I felt as if the log jam had been completely removed and the flood of my imagination returned." In a sense, the Lorax is about, in its biographical context, the transformation of winter into the obligation to recover spring. The Lorax has also a Dartmouth living and lived context. For when Ted Geisel traveled to Hanover, New Hampshire from Springfield, Massachusetts in September of 1921, it was after the catastrophe of the First World War had resulted in anti-German prejudice in the Springfield community. And it had also resulted in prohibition, which removed Geisel, who was the scion of Kalmbach and Geisel Brewery, one of the most successful in all of the Northeast. His friends would call it Comeback and Guzzle Brewery. It meant that that source of resourceful need had itself been devastated. When he came to Dartmouth, he needed a new family, and he needed to have the child who had been abruptly cut off restored by teachers and friends and a new family in a green world that would allow the winter that had settled on Springfield to be transformed into the green world of the imagination that Dartmouth both redeemed and sustained. One of the transfer characters or creatures in the Lorax from Geisel's Dartmouth experience, the Barbalou, which are unlike bears in that they wear Barbalou suits. They're creatures of the imagination who, like the humming fish and the swami swans, travel from the place of the truffula trees when everything is devastated by what could be called ecological winter. As during wintertime, bears and fish and birds also tend to disappear from the visible habitat in the environs of Hanover, New Hampshire. If we imagine the unfinished work of the imagination to inhabit a border at the line between winter and spring, it's easy to imagine a Dartmouth son of Dr. Seuss, Chris Meledandri, class of 1981, taking up that borderland site and reanimating the voices of the Lorax, to take the profound imagination of Dr. Seuss writing in the opening years of the environmental movement in the 1970s and reimagine that for the environmentally savvy generation of students and adults in the 21st century. In order to do justice to both the vital, unfinished imagination of the endless springtime called Dr. Seuss's Lorax, Chris Meledandri added a character, Audrey, and renamed the protagonist, Ted, in order to let the audience for the 21st century film experience the true love story at the heart of the relation between winter and spring. It's the deepest romance that the earth has to offer. As you watch that movie, have the sense of the deep Dartmouth past and have the sense of the profound global future that Dartmouth unconscious made possible for Ted Geisel. Vox Clamantis in Deserto. The Lorax is a voice crying out the wilderness for the transformation of a landscape that's been turned into a desolate winter. And as you discuss the film with one another, get a vivid sense of the way in which a Dartmouth son of Dr. Seuss, Chris Meledandri, has taken the seed called the Lorax and planted it in a film that draws out a whole garden of inspired transmutations of Dr. Seuss's wonderful